I'm sitting at my kitchen table on a rain-soaked Saturday in April 2025, pen in hand, trying to capture every detail before sleep carries them away. It's been nearly a year since that night in the desert almost broke me, and I still wake at odd hours, heart pounding, convinced I hear footsteps in the sand outside my van. This is exactly how I'd tell it to a friend, plain, unadorned, and with no extra frills. In June 2024, I was 28, living full-time in my converted cargo van, my bedroom, kitchen, and study, all parked just off a lonely dirt road in southern Nevada. I'd recently started a remote job transcribing legal depositions, which meant long hours at my little folding desk, earbuds in, surrounded by cactus and silence. It suited me. Solitude was my safety blanket. That Thursday evening, I'd wrapped up work around 8. The sky was a bruised purple, and a lone street lamp flickered near the turnoff to the main highway. I left the van door ajar for the cool breeze and boiled water on my camp stove for dinner. I just sat down with a bowl of instant ramen when I heard it, the subtle hiss of a car door closing. In most places, a car pulling up after dusk would have been normal. Here, it felt intrusive. The rattling of gravel under tires sent a shiver down my spine. I peered out the chipped window into the gathering dark. No headlights, just two figures stepping out of an unmarked sedan, crouching by the van's rear. I told myself it was a pair of late-night campers, lost hikers rolling in for the night. But when I locked the sliding door and headed for the side mirror to catch their faces, they were looking right at me. Neither spoke. One held something long and thin, maybe a flashlight. The other had his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. My pulse jacked. I backed away from the window, tried to steady my breath. If they'd seen me, they'd see the van was my home, that everything I owned was inside. I grabbed my phone. Service was spotty out here, but in the 2 seconds it took to flip it open, I heard the click of the lock on the passenger door. I bolted to the front cab, slid across the seat, and locked the doors behind me. The engine was cold. My heart was ice. Through the windshield, I watched as the taller figure tapped on the passenger window, and the shorter one leaned against the hood, lighting a cigarette. Embers glowed like eyes in the gloom. I fumbled with the keys, praying they'd turn. On the third try, the engine roared to life. Tires spun on gravel. I pressed the gas, tires squealing, and fled down the road so fast I didn't see the sedan pull out behind me, headlights stabbing through the rain. I drove until my vision blurred, until mile markers ticked by in a trance. When I finally dared to glance in the rearview mirror, the highway was empty. No lights, no sedan. Shaking, I ended up at a 24-hour truck stop 50 miles away. I parked under a harsh fluorescent lamp, radio static filling the cab, and finally let myself cry. I called 911 to report what happened. They told me patrol cars were busy with local disturbances and said they'd send someone out when available. Their voice faded as I hung up. By dawn, I couldn't stay in that rig. I moved the van to a Walmart parking lot in Fallon, Nevada, and spent the rest of the week alternating between dread and restless sleep. I told my manager I had a plumbing leak, anything to avoid explaining what really happened. A week later, I drove back to my desert patch under daylight, convinced it was all a bad dream. But near my usual spot, I found the gravel scratched and gouged, deep tire marks curving toward my campsite. And on one of the footprints in the wet sand, I found a single black glove, size large, synthetic leather, the knuckles worn. I bagged it, took it back to Fallon, and called the sheriff's office again. They dusted it for prints. A week later, they called to say nothing usable turned up. Probably scavenger fingerprints, the deputy said. We'll keep it in evidence in case someone comes forward. I tried to go on. I stocked up on pepper spray, replaced my phone with one that had an SOS function, installed a motion-activated floodlight on the roof of the van. Each night, I double-checked locks, tightened extra padlocks on the rear doors, pulled the curtains closed. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling someone was watching. Every time the wind whispered through the mesquite trees, I imagined footsteps crunching closer. Most nights I replayed those glowing embers, that tap-tap of a flashlight against glass. One evening in late July, I decided to test the new floodlight. I sat outside the van under the sky's black velvet, a thermos of cold coffee at my side. At 11, I flicked the switch. The lamp flared white across the gravel, painting the landscape in stark relief, cacti casting jagged shadows. I waited. Nothing. I turned it off. A minute later, headlights bled into view. That same sedan eased into the clearing, tires settling on gravel with a whisper. I didn't shout or honk. I just stood, hands open at my sides, heart lodged in my throat. The car coasted to a stop 15 feet from me. The passenger door opened and the shorter man stepped out, stretching the gloveless hand toward me, palm up like he was asking for something. I took a step back. My breath caught. He lifted his other hand and tapped the glove in his palm, beckoning me. Behind him, the taller figure remained in the car, engine running, face obscured by shadow. "Lost," the man said, voice calm, American Midwestern. "We want to apologize for scaring you the other night." I didn't answer. He took a slow step forward. His eyes glinted in the light, blue, too bright against his pale skin. "We're geologists," he lied. "We study soil samples. That light at your camp caught our eye. We meant no harm." My mind raced. "Why the masks?" I asked, voice cracking. He smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. "Dust masks," he said. "We work in old mines, silicosis and all that. Always carry extras." I stared at the glove in his hand, leather cracking. "I found this," I said, "near my door." He glanced at it as if noticing for the first time. "Oh, that. Must have fallen off. Sorry." He tucked it into his pocket. "Look, I'm Tom. This is Pete." He nodded toward the car. "We'd like to make it up to you. Maybe share some coffee." I wanted to run, but my legs were led. Instead, I let him lead me back toward the van. Coffee tasted bitter in my mouth. I watched his every move. He didn't drink. He just stared at me over the rim of the styrofoam cup. After 5 minutes, I stood and handed back the cup. "I'm not thirsty." He shrugged as if offended. "Your van is nice," he said. "Very rustic." I gave a tight smile. "Thanks." He held up his hands, palms outward. "Okay." He stepped back. "We'll leave you in peace. Sorry again." I locked the door as soon as they cleared the floodlight cone. I peered through the rear window as my light swept the car. Both men were inside, doors shut, engine idling. Then headlights off. Then nothing. I drove all night, didn't stop until dawn found me leaking red rubber tires on the highway shoulder. I changed at the garage in Fallon, had to replace all 4. The mechanic said uneven weight distribution could cause it, but I knew better. They'd knifed my tires when I wasn't looking. That was the last straw. I quit the job, moved back home to Oregon, and parked in a friend's driveway where I felt safe enough to sleep with my curtains open. I never heard from Tom or Pete again, never saw the sedan. The sheriff never followed up after the glove yielded nothing. I still keep the floodlight kit in a box under my bed. Every time I pass it, I remember their smooth lies, their calm confidence, the way they circled me like hawks sizing up prey. I sold the van in September and rented a tiny studio in town. I got a landline again, and I sleep to the hum of city noise, traffic, distant sirens, the low drone of an air conditioning unit. Sometimes it's too loud to think, and sometimes it's the only thing that makes me feel alive. I finished this in April 2025 because it's been 6 months since I slept through the night without waking to check the locks. 6 months since my hands shook so hard I spilled hot coffee on my lap. But the silence still echoes in my mind, and every so often, in the back of my throat, I taste dust. It was a cold Friday evening in December when my husband, Caleb, and I decided to treat ourselves to a night away from the house. We'd both been working long hours. He's a nurse, I'm a copy editor, and between raising our 5-year-old son, Milo, and dealing with the usual stress of the holidays, we hadn't had a moment alone in months. We booked a reservation at a restaurant downtown and planned to be out for just 3 or 4 hours. Our neighbor across the street, a quiet high school senior named Nora, had babysat for us a few times before. She was polite, dependable, and always seemed great with Milo. When I texted her that afternoon to ask if she was free, she replied almost instantly with a, "Yes, I'd love to." By 6:30 p.m., she was at our doorstep, bundled up in a coat, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She greeted us with her usual shy smile and walked in, petting our dog and waving at Milo, who was already showing her his latest drawing. I gave her the rundown. Bedtime at 8:30, emergency numbers on the fridge, and snacks in the cupboard. She nodded, already familiar. We'd done this a few times before. Caleb and I left feeling relaxed for the first time in weeks. The dinner was nice. Candlelight, a bottle of wine, and no sticky fingers tugging on our sleeves. I remember laughing for what felt like the first time in ages. But around 9:45 p.m., while we were waiting on dessert, I noticed I had a missed call. It was from our landline. That immediately struck me as odd. Who even uses the house phone anymore? I tried calling back, but no answer. I texted Nora to check in. She replied a minute later, "Everything's fine. Sorry. Pocket dialed." I showed Caleb, shrugged it off, and went back to the table. But something about it didn't sit right. I don't know how to explain it. Just that gut feeling, like something wasn't quite right. We pulled into our driveway just after 10:30. The porch light was on, and the house looked calm from the outside. I could see Nora sitting on the couch through the window, her head down, probably on her phone. When we walked in, she greeted us like normal. Milo was already asleep. Everything seemed fine, too fine. But as Caleb handed her cash and thanked her, I noticed something strange. Her backpack, which she always left near the kitchen table, was zipped up and sitting right by the front door, like she was ready to bolt. I walked her out and thanked her again. She smiled, but it was tight, forced. I watched her cross the street, then went back inside, suddenly aware of how quiet the house felt. Something about the air felt off. Still, I went to check on Milo. He was out cold, but the nightlight in his room was turned off. That stood out to me. He was terrified of the dark. He never slept without it on. That's when I noticed it. The baby monitor on the nightstand. It had been unplugged. I didn't remember doing that. Caleb wouldn't have, and I was sure we had left it on when we left. I plugged it back in and walked out, now feeling a tight coil forming in my stomach. Then, as I walked through the hallway, I saw the closet door near the laundry room slightly ajar. We always kept it shut because it was jammed and hard to close once opened. I walked over, reached for the handle, and stopped. There were muddy boot prints on the floor in front of the door. Not small like Nora's, not the kind of smudges our dog might drag in. These were large, heavy, like work boots. I backed away, heart pounding. I called for Caleb. He was in the kitchen putting away leftovers. When I showed him the prints, he stared at them, confused, then knelt down to look closer. "That's not from me," he said. He yanked the closet open fast. It was empty, nothing inside but the broom, mop, and a few plastic bins. But now both of us were on edge. Something wasn't right. I checked the back door. Locked. The windows are locked. I pulled up the security app on my phone. We had one camera installed in the hallway, mainly to keep an eye on the dog when we were out. I rewound the footage. Around 7:45 p.m., Nora is sitting on the couch with Milo, watching a movie. Then at 8:13 p.m., she gets up and walks to the kitchen. A minute later, she opens the back door. She doesn't close it right away. She just stands there. Then she steps aside, and someone else walks in. A tall man in a dark hoodie, face turned away from the camera. My throat went dry. He walked directly into the hallway, toward the closet. Then nothing. The footage skips to 8:39 p.m. Nora returns to the living room, now alone, and starts folding a blanket. Caleb and I stared at each other. We hadn't heard anything, seen anything. The man never left through the front or back. The police arrived within 10 minutes of our call. They searched the house thoroughly and found a loose panel in the back of the hallway closet behind the shelving. Behind it, an old crawl space that led under the house. Whoever the man was, he'd known exactly where to go. But they didn't find him. He was already gone. Nora was brought in for questioning. She admitted she knew the man. He was her older cousin, recently out of jail. She swore she had no idea he'd stay hidden, said she thought he just needed to grab something and leave. She broke down crying, but it was hard to know what was real. We didn't press charges. The police said there wasn't enough to prove intent. But we changed every lock in the house the next morning, installed more cameras, got a security system. I still don't know what would have happened if we hadn't come home when we did. All I know is, for the first time since moving into that house, I didn't feel safe there anymore. And every now and then when I walk past that closet at night, I swear I still hear breathing. This happened when I was 9 years old, in a small town just outside Bend, Oregon. It was one of those towns where everyone kind of knew everyone else, and if you got in trouble somewhere, your parents usually found out before you got home. I used to ride my bike everywhere. It was this bright blue Schwinn with silver handlebars and a squeaky back brake that made a horrible sound every time I stopped too fast. My mom used to joke that she always knew where I was just by listening for that awful screech echoing through the neighborhood. There was this path behind our subdivision that led into a patch of woods, not very big, just a few acres that bordered the back end of town. Most of the kids in the neighborhood called it the shortcut because it connected our street to the old elementary school and shaved 10 minutes off the ride. I wasn't technically allowed to use it alone, but I did anyway. All the kids did, especially in the fall when the trees turned gold and the dirt path got soft with fallen pine needles. It felt like riding through a tunnel of color. One Friday after school, I decided to take the shortcut home. My friend Lucas had given me a stack of his old Goosebumps books, and they were weighing down my backpack so bad it kept sliding off one shoulder. I remember stopping halfway down the path to fix the strap. That's when I first noticed the sound. It was this faint humming, not a person humming a tune, but more like a low electrical hum, constant, steady, like when you stand too close to a street lamp or an old fridge. At first, I thought maybe someone had a generator running nearby, but this was the middle of the woods. There weren't any houses that close, and I'd ridden that path 100 times before without hearing anything like that. I got back on my bike, kind of unsettled, but not scared yet. I was halfway through the woods when I saw something just off the trail to my right. A little ways into the trees, there was this shed. It was small, maybe the size of a garden shack, and looked like it had been there forever. Gray wood, sagging roof, door hanging just slightly open. I'd never seen it before. And I know that sounds weird, but I really knew that trail. Every bump, every tree root, every weird spray-painted rock. That shed hadn't been there before. I slowed down, squeaky brake and all, and coasted to a stop. The humming was louder now, definitely coming from the direction of the shed. I should have turned around, I know that, but something about it pulled me in. Not curiosity exactly, more like I didn't want to look, but I had to. Like when you're watching a scary movie and you know something bad's about to happen, but you can't look away. I left my bike on the trail and stepped off into the brush. The closer I got to the shed, the heavier the air felt. Like the temperature dropped a few degrees, and the trees around me got really quiet. No birds, no wind, nothing. When I got to the door, I could see there was a padlock on it, but it was unlatched. Just dangling there like someone had unlocked it, but hadn't bothered to take it off. I touched the wood. It was warm, warmer than it should have been for how cold the air felt. And then I opened the door. Inside, it was pitch black. No windows, just a rush of that humming sound, way louder now. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel something. A presence, I guess. Heavy. Watching. And then I heard a voice. Not a whisper, not a shout. Just a flat, calm voice coming from inside the darkness. "You're not supposed to be here." I froze. The voice didn't sound angry, but it wasn't friendly either. Just wrong. Like it didn't belong to a person. Like someone was repeating the idea of a voice. My brain finally kicked in and I slammed the door shut. The moment it latched, the humming cut off completely. Silence. I backed away fast, half tripping over dead branches, until I reached my bike. I pedaled the rest of the way home like my life depended on it. I didn't tell my mom. I don't know why. Maybe I thought she wouldn't believe me. Maybe I didn't want to admit how scared I'd been. But I avoided the shortcut after that, even if it meant taking the long way around with my squeaky brake echoing off the sidewalks. A few weeks later, I finally broke down and told Lucas about it. He looked at me kind of weird and said, "What shed?" I told him where it was, and he shook his head. Said he'd been through there just yesterday and there was nothing, just trees and trail. So I convinced him to come with me and check it out. We went back one Saturday morning, both of us riding slow, looking for the spot. I remembered exactly where I had turned off the trail. I found the same bend, the same tree with the gnarled roots like claws reaching out of the ground. But there was nothing there, no shed, no path leading off into the woods, not even a disturbed patch of dirt where something might have been. Just pine needles and silence. Lucas said I probably dreamed it. Maybe I had. But here's the thing. I had dirt on my sneakers when I got home that day, pine needles stuck to my jeans, and I never took that shortcut again. Sometimes, even now, I think I hear that humming. Not often, but every once in a while when I'm near power lines or when my fridge kicks on in the middle of the night, I'll catch myself holding my breath, listening for a voice in the dark, and I always lock the back door. Always.